You are listening to the Doc Malik podcast. This show is 100% independent and fully funded by listeners like yourself. So, if you wish to support Ahmed in all that he is doing, then please subscribe to his channel on Spotify or his Substack. Or simply buy him a coffee with a one-off donation, links to which can be found at docmalik.com. Now, let's get on with the show.
Hi, everybody. Before we dive into this podcast, I just want to mention that my summer retreat is now been launched. First access to my paid subscribers and general release tomorrow. So please look out for the Substack and visit my website, docmalik.com, and go to the retreat section and you'll see all the details there and you can book there. I'd love to see you guys at my retreat. It's going to be an epic weekend with members of our tribe. I was just talking to CJ about this and the fact it's just so difficult to find people who are just authentic and are able to talk about what's going on in the world. Everybody seems to be living a lie nowadays, but on this weekend, it's going to be the complete opposite. You're going to be overwhelmed by the atmosphere and the love and the fun that we're going to have. So if you want to have fun, if you want to have a break, if you want to come back refreshed and energized and spend some quality time with me, book in my summer retreat last weekend of June. All right, folks, I'll see you there. Bye-bye. Seriously, every single time, like, I don't know if you can see this. These are notes. Someone brought notes with them to do a podcast because a lot of my guests come in the studio. And we tore it up. It was garbage. Like, when you think too much and try and script it, it just comes across not authentic and fake. And I know you've got a terrific mind. I read your Substack. You know, I see how you've been prosecuted and persecuted. We don't need a script. But anyway, let's talk about your upcoming books. One of which is talking about the Kafkaesque type trials that you've been going through in Germany, the new normal Reich. I want to hear it from you. I want to hear what it's been like. I mean, some of my listeners probably know what you've been going through. Some of them, probably don't. Do you want to just quickly do a recap? It was about the cover artwork of your short essays that you got into trouble with the authorities, didn't you?
Yeah, let me try to do the short version because a lot of folks do know the story and they've heard all the details before. But
exactly.
The short version, as you know, I was a real vocal critic of the COVID measures. And I wrote a lot of essays, all during 2020 and 2021, during the horrible period that I'm calling the COVID era now. And so collected a bunch of those essays in a book and published the book. And the cover art of the book was basically my brilliant cover artist, Anthony Freda, and we ripped off William Shirer's famous classic book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. We took that same cover, black cover, red print, little white circle with a swastika in it. And we used the same cover, except we covered the swastika up with one of the medical-looking masks that we were all forced to wear for years. And so the book got published. The book was doing well. I put out a couple of tweets. I wrote them in German. This was, there was a big debate going on in Germany at the time about, should we cancel the mask mandates? And, most of the German public was like, no, everyone needs to be forced to wear masks at all times. And so I put out a couple of tweets kind of mocking the masks and the health minister, Karl Lauterbach. And the German authorities didn't like those tweets. So they contacted Twitter and had the tweets censored. They contacted Amazon, I believe. I can't prove that. Amazon promptly banned the book in Germany and then later in Austria and the Netherlands. And they reported me to the first of all, the Berlin prosecutor, but also the Bundeskriminalamt, which is the federal police office here in Germany. It's like the FBI. And they prosecuted me. They prosecuted me basically for allegedly distributing pro-Nazi propaganda because I tweeted the cover artwork of my book. And to make the story real short, fought it, went to trial. At my first trial, I was acquitted, of course, because, there's a ban on Nazis displaying swastikas in Germany, or people who are promoting Nazism. But of course, there are many exceptions to this ban, because you have to be able to display swastikas to do all kinds of things like make art or, protest against, fascist or totalitarian activity, which is what I was doing, obviously. And so the judge recognized that, of course, understood the law, didn't like me, called me an idiot, but acquitted me. And so, I thought I was all done. But in Germany, it turns out that the prosecution can appeal an acquittal, which they did. And so I was dragged into appeals court, where they overturned my acquittal and convicted me of disseminating this pro-Nazi propaganda. And so we filed an appeal with the German Supreme Court, which is the Bundesverfassungsgericht. And that's the short version. We're waiting to hear back from the German Constitutional Court about our complaint.
Dude, you know what? A great summary. I was very tense the whole time you were telling me that, for the sole reason that a queen wasp came into the studio and was buzzing around me.
I was also kind of tense, but not because of a wasp.
Well, dude, like we've got a lot in common, because I used satire on my tweets, and that got me into trouble, and eventually started a whole mothball, snowball avalanche, which led to me being cancelled as a surgeon. And, some people say to me, you shouldn't use satire, and that's, it's offensive, it's hateful, it's hurtful. But satire, I think, is really important. It's the use of humor and irony and exaggeration, because that sometimes cuts through when you're trying to ridicule and expose and criticize people's stupidity and vices, and, just bring into sharp focus how absurd people are in power or authority and what they're doing. Sometimes that's what's needed. Sometimes you need that wet fish to slap in your face. And if people get upset, well, I'm not responsible for other people's feelings. Neither are you. I mean, don't read it. Move on. But I've been organizing a retreat for this summer. Where a group of my supporters can get together and we can do this health and wellness retreat. And I've come across people who don't want to work with me because they're like, oh, we've looked at your tweets and we think they're transphobic or they're offensive, and your COVID views. We're worried about how this will, impact our business and how, So this is a big problem, and you're right at the edge, the leading front of it. And what I would say to people is, if today it's CJ Hopkins and me, tomorrow it's you. Like, I find people can't speak anymore. Everyone is self-censoring. And a big thing that you talk about is freedom of speech. One of your recent Substacks, you wrote to Jay Bhattacharya and Bobby Kennedy and Vance in this open letter, and you're kind of like beseeching them to come on, stand up for free speech. It's kind of dead already, CJ. Don't you think?
It may be, but I'm going to continue to act as if it isn't. It's actually in one of the chapters of the new book. The new book, I should say, the new book is a follow-up to the book that, got me prosecuted. The new book covers the period from, it's 2022 to 2024. And it really, there's a couple of storylines in the new book, one of which is the aftermath of the COVID era, which includes my prosecution and all of that, and the other of which is the rise of the Musk cult and its merger, with MAGA and so on. But what I was going to say is one of the chapters in the book, a couple of them are my statements, the statements that I made in court at my two trials. And in one of those statements, what I said was, the German authorities can make a mockery of the rule of law and democratic principles if they want, but as long as you continue to claim that Germany is a democratic country, I'm going to continue to act as if that's what it is, and I'm going to insist on my rights. And you just reminded me of that. Whether free speech is dead or not,
yeah,
I'm going to continue to act as if it is not. As long as the authorities are claiming that our democratic rights and principles are still in effect, well, I'm going to insist on mine.
Yeah, I love that. And, in one of your Substack pieces, again, I think it was from the open letter, you talked about how politicians and people from the West talk about our democratic rights and principles and uphold them, but essentially that message is meaningless. They're just empty platitudes that they violate whenever it's convenient for them and the party that's in power. And they will sanctimoniously recite it whenever one party wants to shame another political party or country or regime or leader, but then ignored and made a mockery of the moment it's expedient. I thought that was great what you wrote in your Substack, and it's completely true. It's just hypocrisy. They talk about democratic rights, but it's really what they're saying is it's one rule for us and one rule for you, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's first of all, it's hypocrisy. That's nothing really new or shocking coming from politicians, but I think it's particularly damaging in this context. The real story that I've been telling and trying to chase for years now is about the dissolution of our democratic rights, the democratic rights that we all, people of a certain age who have gray beards like you and I, grew up. We were all indoctrinated to believe, we live in democracies, we have these democratic rights, they're sacred, and so on. And what I've been tracking in my books and in my columns is the evolution of the system. It's a global system that we all live under, towards a much more authoritarian, much more totalitarian form. Basically, the global capitalist system that we live under doesn't really need to give us all those democratic rights anymore. Those were all very much necessary when communism was the boogeyman. And, they needed to be able to say, yes, but you're all free here. You're free consumers. You can do whatever you want. For the last 35 years or so, if you follow that line through history, what you see is this new global system, which came into being after the end of the Cold War, just gradually chipping away, gradually eroding, gradually taking away those democratic rights, and telling us, sometimes subtly and sometimes not so subtly, telling us, oh, all those democratic rights that you think you have, you don't have those. You don't have those because, you see, we're living in an endless series of emergencies. And, due to these emergencies that are going on, whether it's the war on terror, or the war on populism, or the war on a virus, or the war on illegal immigration, or whatever it is, due to these emergencies, we need to suspend all of those constitutional rights and democratic rights that you thought that you had, and they're being stripped away from us bit by bit by bit. And part of what's so frustrating right now is that so much of the opposition to this nascent authoritarianism, totalitarianism, whatever people want to call it, so much of the opposition to that during the COVID years was coming from the conservative side of the spectrum, yes?
Yes.
And so much of that opposition has now been captured, by what I call the Musk cult, which has kind of merged with MAGA. And it has been captured and co-opted and redirected. And now it's those folks who are jumping up and down and saying, well, no, we can't afford to have, the rule of law and, free speech and so on, because we have another emergency. We have an anti-Semitism emergency. We have an illegal immigration emergency. It keeps switching sides. And I think it's particularly, just frankly, it's sad to me, because so much of I watched this budding opposition that sprang up during the COVID era just get taken over and captured and redirected and channeled away from the global system that we live under, and channeled at illegal immigrants or pro-Palestinian people or whoever.
I don't know, CJ. I think a lot of these people at the front were never our friends in the first place. Call me cynical. Trump's America First administration is no more foreign aid except for Israel. No more wars except when it's for Israel. Freedom of speech except when you criticize Israel. America First except, fill in the dots. And, I know you're talking about Elon Musk, but I have issues with all of them. I'd love to know why in particular you want to point out Elon Musk, whose grandfather was founding member of Technocracy Inc. in Canada. And I think the technocrats are in a position of power now. But they're using things like communitarianism. I don't know if you've heard of that. So that's, communitarianism is big, CJ. I'll send you some stuff to read about that. It's a philosophy, it's an ideology, it's a language, it's culture, it's everything to try and manipulate us and our minds. And in that, they also use, lawfare and war. They use words as weapons, the weaponized words. So the weaponization of language closes the doors of human perception. But you know what you've gone through, the SLAP, strategic lawsuit against, public participation. You're a vocal, you're a dissident, you're speaking out against authorities. How do we shut you up? We're going to do a stupid, bogus lawsuit against you. We're going to drag you through this Kafkaesque kind of trial where, like the book, The Trial, you don't know who the court is, who your jailers are, who's arrested you, what your charges are, and you can't defend yourself because it's just mumbo jumbo legal warfare, and you're tied up in knots and like a pretzel, and all your energy is now gone fighting this absurd lawsuit, and you can't have the energy to fight the authorities anymore. And that's not just you. All the doctors are caught up against their medical licensing boards, being dragged through courts and spending fortune trying to get their license back. I walked away because I knew what was happening, because that's what they want to do. They want to trap you. And that also affects your health, the stress, and I'm sure it's taken a toll on you. So, communitarianism is a huge thing. The lawfare, the war on the mind, the war on language. This is what they're doing. And I think they're very clever and strategic. I think they always put their leaders in positions of opposition, so we will gravitate towards them. We always have to choose one of their sides. I know you focus on Elon Musk, but, I know you've had Bobby and Jay on your shows, or you've been on their shows, so you've maybe got some, some kind of connection with them. But I'm very disappointed with them as well. Where are they? Bobby's more concerned about anti-Semitism than exposing mRNA COVID shots. So I think the whole of the opposition is corrupt, if you don't mind me saying so.
Yeah, well, it's your show, and you can say whatever you want. I wrote in that in the letter in the open letter that you just mentioned, and I wrote it, and it's not an easy letter for me to write. I mean, I consider Bobby and Jay friends of mine, and basically, I was, I wasn't trying to, take a big shit on them or anything. It was basically a plea, and I wrote it in the piece. I said, you guys. I get it. You joined the MAGA team, and you're trying to do, the good that you think you can do. But if you take a look at what's going on and what your team is doing, if you don't speak out against this, first of all, I don't know how you can live with yourself, and second of all, what you're doing is you're destroying all of the good work that you did during the COVID era, because basically people are just going to call you a hypocrite. J.D. Vance was on the letter as well, and I don't know him, personally at all. He tweeted, something about my case. I appreciated the support. I liked the words of his speech that he gave in Munich. But again, you give a speech like that in Munich and everyone celebrates it, and then you come back home and start cracking down on free speech and rolling out all of these authoritarian measures, and people are just going to see you just another hypocrite. Your words don't mean anything. And I think the thing that is most frustrating about it is, the people who were, prominent COVID critics behaving this way. It just hands the other side, it hands the establishment a big club to beat us all over the head with. Then people turn around and look at other critics who aren't hypocrites, and we get painted with the same brush. It's like, oh yeah, you're just in the hypocrite camp, where you said everything before, you said all that stuff before, but it didn't mean anything. I don't know. I think you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think you do, but CJ, I think these people are the establishment. I'm sorry. I also went to a talk where I saw Jay Bhattacharya speak, and I went up to him afterwards. And I was very disappointed with him. This is back 2022. And he was basically saying everything during COVID was just accidents and mistakes were being made. And I'm with Margaret Anna Alice. I don't think any mistakes were made. And he was just saying that it was incompetence. But I also don't believe it was incompetence. And, I feel like these people are political animals. I've seen a video of Bobby where he said a few years ago, the problem is any politician who gets into power is just a liar and will go back on his word. Is he talking about himself now?
Well, I think it's kind of weird that it's kind of, I think I tweeted something about it. It's just kind of weird that I have to explain to some people, politicians lie. That's what they do. When politicians say things, it doesn't necessarily mean that they believe it. It's 2025, and having to explain that to people is just really frustrating. And yeah, that is it's the problem with joining, an administration, with becoming a part of the system, becoming a part of a team that then overrides, your principles and overrides the truth. I don't know how people do it. Again, I'm, everyone's entitled to their own views, and I respect yours. Like I said, I'm not interested in taking a big shit on Bobby and Jay. And I understand the position that they're in. I just don't know. I just don't know how you do it. I don't know how to. I don't know how I would live with myself if I had to lie or hold my tongue for the sake of a team that I was on.
Well, I think that just goes.
People do it.
Yeah, well, that's because you've got morals and ethics and integrity. That says a lot then about the other people. But you talk about cults and cults of Elon Musk. I think there's cults everywhere, CJ. There's cults of Donnie or Donald Trump. There's cults of Bobby. It's funny how they all have first names, like Boris Johnson. You just give them a first name. It makes them more familiar, affable, one of the buddies. No, it's Mr. Johnson, the Prime Minister, Mr. Kennedy, Health Secretary, Mr. Trump. But you even Elon, it's not Mr. Musk, it's Elon. It's Elon, your friendly local billionaire technocrat, just a regular guy. And it's funny how there's been a kind of rebranding exercise for a lot of these oligarchs and billionaires, whether, it's Bill Gates a few years back to Mark Zuckerberg, who's just, curly hair, surfer dude, jiu-jitsu guy now, not the master of CEO of Facebook and censorship. No. And, mistakes were made during COVID. We won't do that again. Slap on the wrist kind of thing. I love this rebranding exercise. But anyway, let's talk about the attack on freedom of speech. I mean it seriously. I was shocked when I was reaching out to people who I thought were relatively on the awake side. We're talking about meditation, breath work, yoga instructors, or sauna facilitator. People who you would think are all hippie-ish and anti-vaccine and blah, blah, blah. And when I approached them, they were like, either I can't be associated with you It's going to be damaging to my brand. I need to be inclusive. And it's like, okay, so how are you inclusive by not working with me? You're excluding me. So that's not very inclusive. Then I had another one who was very honest, said, look, I've just started out in my business, and the problem is I need to get along to go along. I need to go along to get along, or get along to go along. And if I work with you, I'm really worried about what impact it will have on my business and how it might close doors for me. So I can. Now, I know that's not freedom of speech, but it kind of is similar in the sense that people are really scared. And she said, I actually share your opinions, Doc. I just can't be publicly seen to agree with them. So hold on one second. So people are now censoring what they say, what they think, and who they associate with and who they do business with because of fear of repercussion. How is this a climate for freedom of speech or any kind of freedom?
Yeah, obviously it's not a freedom of speech, a classic freedom of speech issue, but what you're describing is one of the symptoms of creeping totalitarianism, creeping authoritarianism, systemic authoritarianism. I've been talking about this is an example of what I'm talking about. More and more, this is what our societies are being transformed into. They're being transformed into environments where people are afraid to express themselves, because there are real consequences. I've experienced those consequences myself. As I said, the second storyline in the new book is the rise of the Musk cult and the co-optation of that conservative pushback against the COVID measures and the COVID regime. How that worked, through the Twitter files and through Musk's rebranding of it's now Free Speech X, which is just as censored as the old Twitter, if not more, just differently. I lost my train of thought.
Well, going back to Musk. Have you noticed wherever he speaks, whether it's on Joe Rogan or publicly or whether he's tweeting, he's always said there's a lot of promise in mRNA vaccines. That mRNA vaccines are the future.
Sure, I remembered my train of thought, though.
Go for it.
So I want to bring this up because I think the point that you made is important. Since I started criticizing Musk, since Trump took office, and I started criticizing the Trump administration, I've lost like over 10% of my paid subscribers on Substack, and just received tons of hate mail from people who used to send me mail saying, "Oh, CJ, you're such a hero for fighting for free speech," and so on. And of course, the second that I'm not towing the new party line, "Oh, CJ, you're just a filthy commie liberal, and you always have been, and you should die."
By the way, very quickly, we're in the same boat. I've had a similar drop and same attack from my own supporters. "Oh, what is wrong with you? Calling out Trump and Elon and Bobby. You're serving the enemy. Blah 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 blah." Same as you.
Right, and the point that I was getting at is there are very real consequences to speaking your mind. Just like the friend or colleague that you were talking about said, "Hey, I agree with you, but I can't say it." The smart thing, if I was a smart businessman, the smart thing for me to do when everything shifted, when Musk took over and rebranded Twitter, when Trump took office, and that whole the smart thing for me to do as a business person would have been to keep my mouth shut. Keep my mouth shut, just keep hammering away on my prosecution and the free speech theme, and basically anything that could fit into the narratives that, the Musk MAGA, gang are pouring out. That would have been the smart thing for me to do. Right. And I'm not the only one, this is not these are not genius realizations on my part. People who are out there, influencers, journalists, prominent people who speak out, they can read the room, and they understand, hey, if I built my audience basically during the COVID era, and if I start criticizing, people like Musk, people like, Jay and Bobby and Trump and so on, I'm going to take a beating. I'm going to take a real beating. Anyway, I just wanted to touch on that.
But why are you taking
real pressure?
Why are you taking that beating?
Because I don't care. Because it's basically because I'm a crazy ass.
No, it's more than that. It's more than that.
No, I think it's that. I think it's basically, I have a problem with authority that I've had my whole life.
Do you not think? Listen. I'm in the same boat.
I don't like bullies.
Yes.
I don't like bullies, and I don't like environments where people are intimidated and threatened and, subtly or not so subtly told, hey, if you express that opinion, we're going to hurt you. To me, that's bullying. And I don't like bullies.
But do you not think it's not just that you're reacting for the sake of reacting, you're reacting because, they're bullies. It's also because you fundamentally believe something is right. You fundamentally believe in truth and logic and reason, and that you will not conform and bow down to the stuff that's not true and stuff that's wrong. That's where it's at. So I'll give an example. I had a doctor reach out to me abroad who is being persecuted for speaking out against the COVID mandates and shots. And then we were talking in the podcast, and he was very refrained, and not the way he was talking to me over the phone, and just very controlled and measured in the way he spoke. And I was like, well, what's your stance on childhood vaccines? And then he went, okay, cut, stop. I was like, what happened? He goes, I can't talk about that. I went, sorry, why? Oh, well, because I'm already, in the shits with the court about the COVID vaccines. If I say anything about the childhood vaccines, I mean, that's another case will start. I'll be screwed. And, I really want to get back to work. I want my license back. So here's a dissident doctor who's now self-censoring even more. And there were other things. And we were talking about, he was like, no, I can't talk about that. No, I can't. I was like, dude, I don't think we can do this podcast because this is just bullshit. Like, you either speak your truth or you don't. Like, you're basically censoring yourself. He went, I am. Oh my God, I'm really disappointing myself in you. Am I not? I said, I'm really sorry. I'm just not in a position to lose it all. I'm fighting for my license. I need this for the sake of my marriage, everything. I can't. And what I'm trying to say is this is the pressures people are under now. And this is a dissident doctor who felt the need to do something against COVID. But even now, he's so measured and holding back. There's very few people like you and me who just say what's on our mind. And that's not to say that we don't get things wrong. I get things wrong. But it's so sad that in today's world, we can't just say things. We can't just make mistakes. And it's fine. It's if you dare to speak out against authority, like the boot is coming down on your face. Well, and your case is an example, not just of a Kafkaesque type trial, but also Soviet show trial. Because what they're trying to say is, all you did was put up a pretty cool picture, a graphic picture to really home in what was happening in that era. I mean, it's a work of art. I mean, years from now, it'll be in a museum somewhere and people will be like, oh, yes, that was a great work of art. Oh, that late CJ Hopkins was such a martyr. They'll be, making statues of you and God knows what else. But, it was nothing terrible you did, but they've made it into something publicly to show other people that if you dare to just squeak out of line, like, we're coming for you. Do you not think that's what it's all about?
I think that's exactly what it's all about, and I've said this over and over again. And just by the way, I'm hardly the only one. There's an artist down in southern Germany, I think he's somewhere around Munich, who created a piece for an exhibition, which was like a Chanel bottle that was playing off of the Arbeit macht frei slogan, from Auschwitz, whatever. I think it was COVID or Impfung macht frei. The vaccinations will make you free. Anyway, they prosecuted him as well. I'm hardly the only one. But I made this point in another essay recently. The simple way to understand what's happening, it's heads on spikes. It's one of the oldest tactics of power, in the book. What they do is they take someone, prominent, semi-prominent, off with the head, stick the head on a spike outside the castle gate. The message is, this is what will happen to you. I've made this point over and over again, is that, people like me, the message isn't for us. If they, I don't think they thought they were going to shut me up. Anybody who pays attention to me understand I'm not going to shut up. The message isn't directed at me. I'm just the medium that the message is delivered on. I made the point recently, the same holds true for, what is his name? Mahmoud Khalil?
Yes.
In the States?
Yes.
Also, it's people say, gosh, why did they pick Mahmoud Khalil? They don't have a crime or anything. All they've got is, speech. And I said, it's kind of the point, folks. They want his head on a spike as an example. It's like, speak up, and this will happen to you. That's exactly what it is. It's heads on spikes.
And that, it's funny. You can criticize everybody and everywhere, but you can't criticize Israel. You can't reference the Holocaust or Nazi Germany or the persecution of the Palestinians in Gaza. You do that, that's it. You're cancelled. They've really weaponized anti-Semitism, and it's just a minefield now. It's a minefield. Like, they've weaponized words, logic, reason. Just where the mundane is now just absurd. It's just, everything is just crazy. And I can understand why young people today are scared to say anything and have just vanilla beige opinions about nothing and go along with the latest slogans and statements. I stand by this, or whatever latest iteration of I stand by this is. It's just too much. It's just too much at their young career, especially if you're indebted coming out of university. You got debts. You're getting paid peanuts for your salary. You got a career to worry about. You just shut your mouth and put your head down and just move along. But it's crazy, this world we're living in. It's so dystopian, CJ.
Well, what it is it's creeping totalitarianism, or authoritarianism, if people are scared of the word totalitarianism. It's a society pervaded by fear. And that's the point. I actually understand people, in my old age. I think I'm a little bit more forgiving. I tend not to blame the people as much as I try to point out, that it is the environment, it is the system that they are living in that is creating this atmosphere. I made this point during the COVID era when a lot of people who I wanted to speak out weren't speaking out. And I made the point, look, I'm speaking out. I've been relatively poor my whole life, starving artist. I don't have kids. I don't have a mortgage. I don't have a job. It's funny because back at the time I said, there's not much they can do to me. This was before they prosecuted me, right? But that was the point. And I was contrasting myself with, colleagues who have a mortgage and 2 kids that they're trying to put through school and who are working, for a large institution. And who have all of that to lose. It's a different kind of threat when the system can basically say, oh, yeah, you go ahead and speak out. And what we'll do is we'll destroy your career, right? We'll take away your ability to earn money to feed your family and house your family. Do you want to speak out? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well,
my point, it's not to let anybody off the hook, but my point is to to shine a little light on the situation that authoritarian systems, that totalitarian systems put us all in. That's the situation that they put us in.
So, CJ, how do we fight back against this? Do you have any solutions in your books? I mean, how do we just wait for the whole system to implode? Because I can imagine that systems like this, totalitarian states and authoritarian states have come and gone so many times. The problem is sometimes it can be quite a long stretch. Sometimes it can be a quite short stretch, but whatever it is, there's always a lot of damage. There's always a lot of death. Whether it's a Khmer Rouge, whether it's Stalin and his plans in Russia and the Holodomor. I mean, these kind of authoritarian states cause a lot of human wreckage. What's our get out of this? Is it just time? And I'm afraid, a lot of people are going to suffer on the way. Or is there other tangible ways to get out of this?
I don't have any magic solution. The thing that I always try to stress to people is, if there is a way to stop it, to derail it, to, get us out of it, to force it to evolve into something else, if there is a way to do that, rather than just, having to, hang on as it runs its course, if there's a way to do that, to resist it or to change it, it begins with recognizing what it is. The system is it's just one of the main functions of the system is to prevent people from recognizing what it is. We talked a little bit about the Musk cult, and the reason that I think it's so important is, what happened with Musk and Twitter is kind of that was kind of a microcosm for what's happening now with the MAGA movement and the Trump administration. It was by the end of the COVID era, there was enough awareness that we had been propagandized, that people had been hoodwinked, that that so much of what they had told us was absolute bullshit. There was a really large, healthy, nonpartisan, very diverse opposition movement that had come into being, and it needed to be destroyed. There was no way the system could let that stand. And it has been destroyed. And part of the way that it's been destroyed is exactly what Musk did with Twitter, which, by the end of Twitter, everybody knew that Twitter was completely infiltrated by the authorities and the establishment, and was just banning people and suppressing speech and all of that. So Twitter could not go on that way. Right. So in rides Elon Musk to the rescue. It's going to be free speech, Twitter. Here's my sink. And, the bird is free. And basically all he did was rebrand Twitter and turn it into, a mouthpiece for the MAGA right. If you take a look at what Twitter is today, and then sell it as it's free speech, Twitter, everyone, we're all free. It's just rebranding, folks. They just put a different hat on it. And I've been tracking this, and I'm going to keep tracking this. This is one of the ways that the system redirects oppositional energy away from itself and into, other areas. It's like people in the United States actually believe that the Biden administration was behind everything that happened in the COVID era and the global censorship that was rolled out. Somehow the big bad Biden administration rolled out a systematic global censorship program. I'm babbling, but what I'm trying to get at is if we can't understand what we are actually up against, which isn't a bunch of bad guys sitting on Klaus Schwab's yacht or the bad Biden administration, it's a global system, folks. If we can't begin to face what we're actually up against and what is actually happening, we're never going to be able to conceive of any solutions or any ways to push back against it. So that's where most of my effort is focused right now, is trying to get people to let go of the narratives that they are being fed on a daily basis, on a minute by minute basis, and start to see the big picture.
Hi, me again. You're listening to the Doc Malik podcast. This show is 100% independent and fully funded by listeners like yourself. So if you wish to support Ahmed in all that he is doing, then please subscribe to his channel on Spotify or on his Substack, or simply buy him a coffee with one of the donation links which can be found at docmalik.com. Now, let's get back to the show.
I think, but the problem is human nature. People want a team. They want a team to root for. And we get offered teams. And people forget it was actually Trump that pushed Operation Warp Speed and all the original COVID vaccines and whatnot. And a lot of the censorship was already happening under his watch. But that's by the by. So, I mean, the problem is, it's human nature, isn't it? We all want to root for a team. We all pivot from one to another. And the evil ones know that they can only go one direction so far before there'll be exhaustion and rebellion. So they just pivot and tack. And it's like a boat. I've given this analogy, a boat sailing in the, against the wind. It'll tack left, right, port, starboard, but the direction is always straight ahead.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it goes that way or that way. At the end, it's going straight ahead. And that's the same with left, right, Labour, Conservative, Democrat, Republican, whatever. It's the same direction. They both speak the same language. And right now, Trump's administration is filled with billionaires, oligarchs, technocrats, and mostly people who were formerly Democrats. It's like they're all the same people, and they just get a rebranding exercise to make it more palatable to one group. And they know, under Biden, people were starting to lose faith in the Democrats. They're like, great, let's pivot now. Let's pivot back. And it's that they want us playing at the casino table. They don't want us to walk away. And just when things get really, really bad, they go, here's a few more chips you can play with. Here's a few more drinks. So you stay at the table. Because the worst thing that can happen is we all just walk away. We stop playing their game. We stop choosing the options that they give us. But that's very hard ask. And I think a lot of people find that very difficult. And then when they put their hopes in people like Elon and Bobby and Donald Trump, and you say to people, these guys aren't our friends, folks. Unfortunately, the pitchforks come for us, not the baddies. That's where we are.
Well, yeah, you're playing my tune. This is exactly what I've been trying to get across. Is that if people go back, I've been urging people go back 35 years, go back to the end of the Cold War, and if you watch, through successive swings or tacks, as you said, right, left again. But the through line through all of it is, each tack, it takes us a little bit further in that straight line that you're talking about. And we lose a few more of our democratic rights. And we're conditioned a little bit more to, just mindlessly obey authority. It's like, you got to put your fluid in like 50 milliliter bottles now. Oh no, you gotta take your shoes off. I'm sorry, we gotta grope your kids' genitals, at the airport. That's okay, right? Before you get on the plane and stuff. Oh yeah, no, you gotta wear the medical looking masks, right? When you go into the restaurant, you gotta wear the mask. When you sit down at your table, you can take the mask off because the virus can't get you, at your table. But if you get up to go to the bathroom in there, you gotta put the mask back on, right? And on your way out, if you take the elevator down, everyone's going to, turn around and stare at the wall, stand on the little circles. Every step just conditions us a little bit more, to mindlessly obey authority, whatever it is, and to just parrot whatever propaganda, people roll out. It's incredibly frustrating to me. People were arguing about the the Mahmoud Khalil case and the case, I'm sorry, I forgot the woman's name, from Tufts, who's also being persecuted. She wrote an op-ed or something in her college newspaper. And people are just mindlessly repeating on social media over and over again, they're terrorists, they're terrorists and they committed other crimes. And, I don't have the energy to do it anymore. I did it too much during COVID, but I see other people asking them, what crimes? What other crimes did they commit? They're terrorists. They're just mindlessly repeating propaganda like robots. All of these things are just classic hallmarks of authoritarian and totalitarian systems.
Absolutely.
That's the trajectory.
So I've come to the conclusion that the age of consumption is over. They don't really care if we consume anymore. With AI, robotics, and everything, and over the years they've now amassed so much money and power and resources. They don't really need us to consume anymore. So now the age of consuming is ending. We're now entering the age of control. It's all about age of control and consolidation, so that their power and resources can never be taken away from them. And they need authoritarian regime to do that. And, even just listening to Joe Rogan recently, I think he had a comedian on, Dylan or someone, and Joe was like, oh, do you know what? AI is going to come in and AI is going to run the world. It'll be so much better. AI will be the best government. And, it's all coming towards like a one world government. They're kind of drip feeding what they want, this idea, this narrative that, what? They'll all be AI technocrats running because they're the experts. They'll know how to do things properly. And there'll be resources allocated accordingly for whatever BS reason, whether it's the climate or whatever. And most of us will just be living on universal basic income, which they kind of like practiced during COVID years with furlough and whatnot. They'll strip away our rights, democratic rights, because of some external exogenous threat. And, the government will keep you safe. It'll keep you fed and warm, and you'll be entertained with porn and whatever else. And you're, the modern equivalent of Soma. And that's what they want. I mean, I think that's where we're heading toward. Now, I'm not saying there's a little group of people who are engineering all this, but I kind of think there is. I think some very powerful families and bankers think, even the experiment of Bolshevism and communism, it was the same people behind it as capitalist New York, Wall Street. They want control and consolidation. And I feel like in the last century, it was almost an experiment, which model was most effective. And now I think they're coming to their own kind of hybrid, fusing, technology, bit of fascism, corporatism, public-private finance initiatives. And what's really going to be taken away is real democracy, if that was even a good thing in the first place. Don't you think that's where we're heading?
No. Or a couple points. I hope I can remember both of them. I see it a little bit differently. One of the points that I've made over and over again is, I've talked about what's happening. When I talk about the new normal, right, or the new normal, I'm talking about this new nascent form of totalitarianism that I believe is coming into being. And it is not 20th century totalitarianism. I think it's really difficult for us to get our minds around it because it's global capitalist totalitarianism. And what that means is, A, it's global. So there's no outside. There's no, nobody's coming to the rescue. It's global. It's the entire world. And that's also difficult for us to imagine, because when we imagine society, we imagine the societies that we live in, and we forget that there are all these other societies around the world where consumption very much, needs to continue. That's the other point. It being global capitalism, consumption is an essential part of it. I don't disagree that some of what you describe is probably part of where we're headed. But I encourage people to open their minds and to maybe, not even have the answers right away, and to not grab so hard on the models that we already understand, of totalitarianism, because those models, I don't think they apply anymore. We've never been in a situation like this in human history where one ideological power system dominates the entire planet. And that changes everything. And also when that system is global capitalism. And capitalism depends, existentially depends on the simulation of democracy. This simulation has to continue to one extent or another. And this is, I think, what's very interesting to me, and what I've been trying to track is how the simulation of democracy continues at the same time that our rights are being stripped away. I mean, we've seen it happen for the last 35 years. Yes, I'm sorry, you need to be body scanned and, iris scanned and, checked by the soldiers, at the entry to the store where we want you to come in and continue to buy the products that we're putting out. So we're only at the beginning of this. And, just abstractly, if it wasn't so horrible, it would be really fascinating. But the short version of all of this is I'm really encouraging people to try to set aside all of the models that they have and try to understand this new territory that we're in.
I think it is a new model, and I think the reason why is there's been so many advances in the art of propaganda and behavioral manipulation, the science of understanding how to manipulate people, how to inject ideas and thoughts in people and make them think it's their own ideas. I think that's the thing. And, like I said, I would urge you to really look at communitarianism and how they've weaponized language. I mean, things like for the greater good. It's all about community and doing the greater good. Your individual rights are important, but they're null and void if, they go against the greater good, the community itself at large. This is the creeping in that's been taking place where your individual freedom and rights, my individual freedom and rights are now conditional. And that's fundamentally wrong. That's not right. And that's what we're seeing now. And good people have been convinced into doing bad things under the impression that they're doing good.
Sure.
That's the thing. They've been hoodwinked. And it's not the simulation of democracy, it's the charade of democracy. Like, there is no democracy. Like, you get these two options that are superficially different, but they're completely ideologically the same. And, what really matters, they'll push through. For example, if we take the States, the mRNA vaccine platform is still rolling ahead. The factories are opening up. People like Vance and Elon Musk or whoever, people in the administration seem to have vested interest in this tech. So that's carrying on. That's not stopping. Support for Israel will carry on. The war in Gaza, they will still support it. They'll still prop up the Saudi family and, wage war on the Houthis. Nothing really changes. Superficially, they might say things about, the trans group or whatever, but the core issues in introducing ID and digital currency, the control grid mechanism, 5G, that always just keeps going in. Doesn't matter which team comes in, the important things don't change. And that's why I think that we just have an illusion, a charade of democracy. Nothing really changes. And here in the UK, it was even more so, like under the Conservatives and Labour. I mean, it's just a uni party. I mean, there is no democracy.
Yeah, I understand and fundamentally agree with what you're saying. I mean, I made this point over and over again. It's as soon as people just look at the Middle East and everything that's happening in the Middle East, as soon as the Cold War ended, it was absolutely fundamentally clear that the global capitalist system needed to destabilize and completely restructure the Middle East. And it's going to continue until they have restructured the Middle East, folks. That's what the global system is doing, and it makes absolutely no difference who's in the White House or sitting in number 10. Go ahead.
So what will this restructured Middle East look like? Because right now we've supported the war against the Houthis. We've supported Israel waging genocide on the Palestinians. We've supported ISIS and al-Nusra Front taking over Syria and removing a democratically elected leader and secular leader. And now we've got a bunch of fundamentalists in Syria and being carved up by Israel and Turkey. What else are they planning on doing in the Middle East?
It will look like one big marketplace. Basically, the Middle East will look like Saudi Arabia, and people will still be, free. I mean, countries will still be able to, if they want to execute people for blasphemy, that's fine, as long as they're playing ball with the global capitalist system. What needs to be wiped out in the this is from the perspective of the system, obviously, folks, but what the system needs to wipe out in the Middle East is resistance to its ideology or post-ideology or non-ideology. I mean, basically what global capitalism does in a nutshell is it transforms societies into marketplaces, right? That's the end goal. If you look at the United States, which is almost a pure marketplace at this point, the UK is, somewhat behind the United States. The continental Europe is even further behind, but it's happening everywhere. What global capitalism does is it wipes out this resistance within society, and it transforms the societies into marketplaces. And that resistance, the system doesn't care what the nature of that resistance is. It could be, Islamic fundamentalism. It could be right-wing populism. It could be, hardline socialism that doesn't really even exist anymore. It doesn't matter. Whatever resistance, to the valueless post-ideology of global capitalism exists, needs to be wiped out, and societies need to be turned into marketplaces. The other point that I was going to make, I brought up Saudi Arabia, which is a good example, because they literally, execute people for blasphemy, but absolutely integrated into the global capitalist system. Contrast that with Iran, which is the big problem, right? The big boogeyman. You were talking about, the absence of democracy, or when I talk about the simulation of democracy, this is the stuff that I'm actually talking about. When we're talking about Saudi Arabia, we're talking about the simulation of a theocracy. When I talk about the simulation of democracy, it contrasts that with the authoritarianism of the 20th century. The Stalinism in the Soviet Union, the Nazis that banned all, political parties and so on. Our system, this global capitalist system, is never going to do that. It can't. It has to continue to offer us this spectacle, this simulation of the two, puppets. You can vote for this guy, you can vote for that guy. The fate of the world depends on it. The fabric of democracy is at stake. You have to vote for, global capitalist A or global capitalist B, right? It has to continue this simulation because it's a part of the nature of the system itself. It can never go 20th century totalitarian.
Unless global cap is going to be replaced with a new control system. And that's where, I'm open to, things like technocracy, things like, communitarianism, that there's just going to be a different control mechanism. And just like communism had its day, maybe global capitalism will have its day. There's people behind it, and, one system can, it'll come to the end of its uses. It's no longer required. And, I'm just open to these things. So what's Germany like right now? Have people kind of woken up to the madness, or are they still very much indoctrinated, and is it still the new Reich? What's happening out there?
Mm-hmm. It's basically the same. They haven't, German society hasn't really processed, people fought and pushed for a while for the Aufarbeitung. They were going to, review everything that happened. And of course, the authorities have refused to do that. Aya Velasquez and Bastian Barucher and Stefan Holmberg, they all released the Robert Koch Institute files. I don't know if you remember these.
Yeah.
Basically demonstrating how the government and the Robert Koch Institute collaborated to put out the COVID narrative that of course didn't match the facts. This had very little impact. Basically the society is as it was. There is still a small but very strong, vocal minority of people who resisted it during the COVID era and who are still critics now. But the vast majority of German society hasn't changed at all.
And what about political parties? You hear about AfD and whatnot. Are any of them challenging what happened during COVID, or are they all still going along fundamentally with the global, policies, except maybe immigration?
The AfD has always been, has always opposed COVID measures, as far as I remember. I could be wrong about that, but they were opponents of the COVID measures all through that period, and are still opponents of it. The narrative is shifted, of course. Nobody's talking about the COVID era anymore. People are talking about Israel-Palestine or Ukraine or immigration and what have you.
And what's the normal person on the street like? Are they pro-Ukraine? Are they pro-Israel? Or is it a bit more complicated?
I hate to make these gross generalizations, but if you want to talk in gross generalizations, I would say the average bourgeois German is fanatically pro-Israel and pro-Ukraine. The whole Germany's relationship with Israel and all of that is a whole can of worms that we don't have time to get into, but it's unique and really weird.
I think it is. Right, listen, my friend.
Look, I'll say it because I don't give a shit. The short version, and again, gross generalizations doesn't apply to everybody, but a lot of German society is like, we feel so terrible that we killed the Jews. We feel really, really awful about that. And so now we love the Jews and we love Israel and we'll back Israel no matter what. And we don't hate the Jews. We love the Jews. We just hate the Muslims, basically now. And so, all of that ugly kind of authoritarian energy is getting directed, at the pro-Palestinian people. Basically, the pro-Palestinian protests and activities in Germany, have been cracked down on so severely.
Yeah, but you've got huge immigrant populations there as well.
Yeah, especially in Berlin, where I live. I mean, my neighborhood. The Germans call my neighborhood Little Istanbul.
Wow. So is there a strain now there because of, like, in the UK? There's a lot of people, right-wing commentators, and I don't think it's wrong. I think there's been a massive immigration into Western countries, and I'm the son of an immigrant, but I would say it's unhealthy. It's overwhelming local communities and societies, and I think instead of becoming part of a tapestry of the local culture, you're kind of like almost replacing the culture, and that people who are local feel threatened by that, and I think that's understandable. It's also interesting that every country in the world has been told to welcome immigration, in the West in particular, but there's a certain country in the Middle East that doesn't like immigration at all. It's there's a strain here in the UK, and is it similar in Germany?
The short answer is, yes. You mentioned the AfD, and they just recently took a poll, and they are now, I think, the most popular party in Germany. They're probably going to be banned, but part of the reason that they have become the most popular party is the immigration issues. And this drives me crazy because, again, it's one of these things about where I'm trying to get people to. Focus on the big picture. Why? I don't believe cultures and societies are being replaced. We were talking about the Middle East before and the restructuring and the destabilization. It's global capitalism, folks. Borders don't work in a global capitalist system. Of course, they are dissolving the borders. They have been globalizing the labor force for decades. We still all think, and it's natural, right? We're all trained to think that I live in this country, this sovereign nation state, and it has borders, and it's not the world anymore.
Well, I agree with you. I think the whole point is
the system. Let me just finish this point. The system is dissolving borders. It is creating a global workforce, a global consumer, body. And while it's doing that, people are saying, whoa, what's happening? I don't want my culture destroyed. I don't want my culture, turned into a marketplace. And the system says, well, you know whose fault that is? It's these Muslims over here. It's not us. We're not dissolving your borders and stripping away your national sovereignty. It's these dirty Muslims over here. They're your enemies.
Yeah.
Right? And hence the rise of parties like the AfD.
So I'm in agreement with you that there's a system and it's designing everything, it's stripping away sovereignty and creating regional blocks and maybe even a one world government at one point. But I don't know, maybe we disagree, but maybe we don't. I think the system is a tool, but there are people wielding the tool and are crafting the tool. And the system has been designed a certain way and is being manipulated for an end goal and an agenda. I don't think the system is just a blob that's organically just mindlessly doing all of this on its own. I think there's a steering hand. And you might disagree with me. But anyway, listen.
I see it almost exactly the opposite. Which is, of course, there are people. Of course, there are always people running the system. A system can't run itself. It's an abstract thing. But all of these people, you could find them all and point them out. All of these powerful people that are doing this, right? All of these people are in the positions that they are in because they serve the trajectory and the evolution of the system. All of their imaginations are limited by the constraints of the system that they are parts of. You could pick 3 or 5 of these powerful people, shoot them in the head today, and they would be replaced by other people tomorrow that would perform exactly the same role that they perform.
I agree. That's because there's more than 3 or 5. There's more like hundreds and maybe thousands of them. That's why, my friend.
What I'm trying to get at, Ahmad, is all of us. I'll make a philosophical point. I try to make it in a clear way. We are all of our imaginations, all of our choices, everything that we do is limited by the structure of whatever system we are in. And this holds true for people in power just as much as it does for us. They're not off in some, abstract green room that's apart from the world where they can devise, diabolical schemes, for the future. They have investments. Yeah, their power is tied up in material, physical entities. All of these factors influence their decisions and constrain their imaginations. I stress this because I know it's natural for people to want to find the bad guys. And of course there are bad guys. There are always bad guys. There are always people conspiring. What I'm trying to get people to focus on is the system that these bad guys serve. Because the bad guys come and go.
Yep. Listen, final question of the day. You're on your deathbed. I know you don't have any dependents or anything, but say you've got all your loved ones around you. Before you pass on and meet your maker or whatever, what words of wisdom and advice would you give to those around you?
Challenge authority. I have no idea. I have no idea, really. Trust yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. Trust yourself.
Yeah, it's just everything gets so complicated. It's like first you've got to be able to hear yourself. So first of all, strip away all the bullshit that they put on you from the time you were born. If you can do that, then trust yourself.
Amen to that. Absolutely. But I think even when they coat us with layers of lies and crap and indoctrination, your gut instinct is still there, screaming. They can't cover up the gut instinct. It always it's always right.
I believe it, and I also believe in our intuition. I don't think our intuition can be destroyed. I don't, whether it's gut instinct, intuition, whatever you want to call it. I don't think it's destructible, and that's what I mean. Clear away all that crap that they lay on us from the time that we're born, and find that voice that is you, and trust it.
Love it. Right. I, Ahmed Malik, am a private civilian protected by the Geneva Convention. My Substack, social media posts, and podcasts are my personal experiences, observations, and opinions. This information is for educational purposes only. Although I am a doctor, I am not your doctor, and I am not providing medical or legal advice to you or to the wider public. I am not licensed or registered with the GMC or any other licensing board. The responsibility for the interpretation, due diligence, and use of the information from my Substack and my podcast lies with you, the viewer and/or listener. Please do your research and use your discernment. It is not my intention to harass, intimidate, offend, defame, conspire, blackmail, coerce, or cause anxiety, alarm, or distress to any man or woman, and the information presented here is done so with peaceful and honourable intentions. Enjoy, folks.